Well, good morning all, and welcome to the launch of the State of the Service Roadshow here in Perth. My name is Sharon O'Neill, and I'm going to be your MC and facilitator for this session. 4 quick things about me. WA born and bred. I'm the Public Sector Commissioner here in Western Australia. I was the long-term Head of Education, Department of Education here in Western Australia, and I'm also currently the Chair of ANZOG. So 4 interesting points about me, probably not that interesting, but just to set the scene so that you know who your MC and facilitator is today. Thank you for joining us in the room, everybody, and for those online today as well. This is the first time the Australian Public Service Commission is bringing their roadshow, their State of the Service Roadshow, to Perth, WA in person since 2019, so quite an event. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Uncle Barry Winmar to open this event with a welcome to country. Please join with me in welcoming Uncle Barry Winmar.
Mamanjana Quopenye Quopenala Bojaye Nala Nunga Bojaye Mamanjana Quopenye Quopenala Bojaye Nala Nunga Bojaye. I begin by acknowledging my elders past and present. And today we gather on my ancestral land. This is the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. I represent a civilization with the longest continuous connection to this place for some 65,000 years. I represent leaders and elders that have welcomed those from across the shores and this vast brown land, our home, Australia, for more than 3,000 generations. A welcome to country is a sign of mutual respect. We do not take it for granted, and I would like to acknowledge the Australian Public Sector Commission for including a welcome as part of your roadshow event. Ngalak ngiring kurang kolong ngalak noich nejin nonga boja. Nonga mojerpa nejin ngana kwabarak nonga boja kurlong. From the beginning of time to the end, this is Noongar country. Noongar people have been graceful keepers of our nation for many, many years. Ngala jerpen mama buja ngala bara mama court nala court jerpen ninya ngala mai mo Noongar buja. We respect the earth, our mother, and understand we belong to her. She does not belong to us. In all her beauty we find comfort and well-being and a place where everyone has now become a keeper of Noongar country. We ask that you look, listen, understand and embrace all the elements of Noongar country. This is forever our home. It's an honour and privilege to be here today to welcome you to this place. We are in Perth, Boorloo. We are where the Budja meets the Bilya. This is a sacred place We ask that you, while you are here, you walk softly amongst our ancestors with respect. I opened with Warren on the didgeridoo to awaken the spirits from their slumber and to let them know there are visitors here. The smoking ceremony we conducted earlier was there to purify this ground, to rejuvenate, revitalise and re-energise this place and ward off the bad spirits so the good spirits could be with us while we conduct proceedings. In Noongar culture, we've come a long way. There's challenges, there's been obstacles and there's been successes. Today, out of this forum, gives you an opportunity to be able to reflect on where you've come from, where you are today, and where you want to be tomorrow. The place we're standing now, you look to the east, is Karlamunda, the hills, the Black Hills. To the right is Karadamunda. My ancestors camped on the shores at Crawley of the Belia there, the Derby Yerrigan, the Swan River, and looked to the east. As the sun rose in the morning, beat down on our wonderful shores and set as golden sunsets in the west. We know there are challenges, and we ask that all Australians walk with us on this journey to overcome those challenges together, united as one. We call it Jinning and Bo, looking to the future, not knowing what's coming, but facing it together, united. Jinning and Bo, Jinning and Bo, Karadamunda, Jinning and Bo, Noongar boodja, Jinning and Bo, Jinning and Bo, Jinning and Bo. Jinning and Bo, Jinning and Bo, Karadamunda, Jinning and Bo, Noongar boodja, Jinning and Bo, Jinning and Bo. As you listen to the sound of the song, it becomes one with this place, as we are all here gathered as one, connected to this boodja, with the plants, the trees, the animals, so close to the Belia, the waterways, and the wonderful sky. We're all united and we're all connected. With the authority and responsibility bestowed upon me by my Noongar elders and leaders, I welcome everybody here today. And I say to you, Kai Wanju Ngankor Jerpa Niji Noongar boodja Darjali Wangini Noongar boodja Wanju Wanju. Hello and welcome. My heart is happy as we're gathered here on Whadjuk Noongar country, Perth, Boorloo. Welcome.
Thank you, Uncle Barry Winmar, for that very generous and warm welcome to country. Thank you very much. Now, just an overview of how today will run. We're going to have a keynote address, and that's going to be delivered by the Assistant Minister for the Public Service, the Honourable Patrick Gorman MP, and it will be followed by a panel to answer some of your questions. All of the questions are going to be submitted via Slido, and the QR code, I should say, is on the screen now, so you can take out your mobile phone, you can scan the code, and you can also use the URL, which is on the screen. And now I'd like to invite the Minister, the Assistant Minister for the Public Service, the Honourable Patrick Gorman MP, to deliver the keynote address. Please welcome the Minister.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you so much for being part of this, showing the strength of the relationship between the Commonwealth and the fantastic state of Western Australia. I want to thank Uncle Barry Winmar for welcoming us here today. My heart is always happy when I hear Barry welcome us to his land, and I also want to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, pay our collective respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to the elders and traditional owners of the lands of all Indigenous peoples for those who are joining us online today. I'd like to acknowledge the Commissioner, Dr. Gordon de Brouwer. Thank you for your leadership of the Commission, and thank you for your leadership and stewardship of the public service. I want to acknowledge our fellow panellist, Denise Craig, National Manager, Health Zone West for Services Australia. I want to say we get to Slido. It's not there anymore. Don't hold back. This is an event for you. So if you have a burning question, it's not going to be answered if you don't put it in. And if you are too polite, you'll probably find that the response you get doesn't quite satisfy you. So please, get tapping on the iPhone and give us the questions that you want answered. I'd also like to thank all of the public servants who've been part of making this event possible today and extend that thanks for the effort they're putting in for the 4 events that we'll hold across the country over the next week and all of the online participation as well. And if I can thank Sarah, who's assisting us by ensuring that this is a more accessible event by providing Auslan. It is a great pleasure to launch the State of the Service Roadshow here in Perth. It's the first time that we've launched it here in WA. Better late than never. We have representatives today from 58 public service agencies. And I do want to extend a really special welcome to those who are joining us online, reminding us again that no matter where we are, there are always more public servants somewhere else, and it's fantastic. I think we've got about 800 people joining us digitally, and I extend a personal welcome to each and every one of them as well. The public service has come a long way. Imagine this was a gathering of public servants 120 years ago. 89% of you will be working for the Postmaster General, and you'd be out on your bikes delivering telegraphs every day. 9% of you will be working for Trade and Customs, and the remaining 2% will be working for the other 5 departments of the Commonwealth: Attorney Generals, Defence, Home Affairs, External Affairs and the Treasury. But it is hard to overstate the importance of the contribution of the early Commonwealth public servants to the establishment of the new Australian government. Let's have a look at the first Australian public servant, Robert Garran, who was appointed Secretary of the Attorney General's Department in 1901. He served in that role until 1932. 31 years, a record that is not laying down the challenge, but unlikely to be broken. He was a trusted advisor to 11 Attorneys General across 16 different governments. And he summed up his early days as this: I was both head and tail of my department. My first duty on 1 January 1901 was to write down longhand the first number of the Commonwealth Gazette and then send myself down to the government printer with it. His next job was possibly more important, which was to arrange the first ever elections for the federal parliament. Let's take another example. Dr. Harry Wollaston, born in Mokine, here in WA. He was the first head of the Department of Trade and Customs. His job was bringing together 6 colonial customs departments. If you think you've got challenges now with federal-state relations, have a little bit of sympathy for this guy. Each had different rules, they have different practices, different levels of customs, and also different levels of enthusiasm for this new federalism that had just been imposed upon them. Thankfully, he also very craftfully ensured that vital funds from the first nationwide tariff landed safely in the appropriate coffers, being the Commonwealth coffers. And, according to the Evening Standard newspaper at the time, he had another useful skill. He could see smuggled opium through a stone wall or concealed behind a bank of preserved ginger. Not something you'd find in a modern Commonwealth public service job description. Back in 1904, we had just 11,661 permanent staff. Now, here in 2024, the last State of the Service report tells us we have 170,332 public servants. And again, in stark contrast to those early days, now 60% of those public servants are women. The original 7 agencies and government departments that we had at Federation is now 104 agencies. And the population that you collectively serve has grown from some 4 million Australians to 27 million Australians. To put that simply, there is more public to serve. And here, in the great state of Western Australia, nearly 6 in 10 of you work for the 3 large agencies of Services Australia, Home Affairs and the ATO. Around 4 in 10 work in service delivery and 2 in 10 work in compliance and regulation. And over a third of the APS staff here in WA were born outside of Australia, and that's the highest anywhere in the country, something of which we should be very proud. And it brings me to the message that I really hope that you take away from my remarks today. Embracing diversity in the Australian public service is not optional. Australia's social and demographic changes have indeed made us a stronger nation. Now, it's more than ever important for our ways of working to be inclusive. The community expects to see itself reflected in their public service. Our staff expect opportunities to contribute and to progress their career. The annual State of the Service report draws together our strategies and support of specific cohorts within the public service. It promotes employer and employee-led initiatives, which are shaping better experiences and opportunities for people in the APS. For example, the SES 100 initiative, working to boost representation of First Nations people at senior leadership levels in the Australian public service. Another example, the work we are doing co-designing with you the new COLD, culturally and linguistically diverse employment strategy about listening and understanding. And I really want to thank, if I can, everyone who participated in that. Some of the feedback we got was quite surprising, but we needed that honesty. We needed people to speak up. We needed people to tell us we weren't doing good enough and that you expected more of government and you expected more of the leadership in your agencies. And I really thank you, and I hope that you see when we release that strategy in the near future, I hope you see that your efforts in speaking truth to the APSC and to government has been rewarded with a strategy that will address the concerns that you raised with us. Further, we are working to reduce the gender pay gap and report publicly on progress by releasing the 2023 APS gender pay gap data for every agency with more than 100 employees. And taking action to foster a workplace which celebrates diversity, encourages continuous learning and ensures safety and fairness is something that we are proactively doing in a range of areas, including through some of the networks. And for those of you, be it in the room or online, who participate in any of the following networks, again, I say thank you. Be it the Pride Network, the Public Sector Neurodiversity Community of Practice, or the COLD Network. And what we get from each of those is a better understanding of the service, a better understanding of what you expect of us, but also of what you expect from your colleagues, your managers and your co-workers. This is part of a new approach to the workplace relations backed by our government, reaching into every corner of the Australian public service. Outcomes from the recent APS-wide bargaining process will reduce fragmentation of pay and conditions across the service. And while we're talking about reducing of fragmentation, I want to acknowledge the efforts of Kimberly Seats. She's the Assistant Director at the ABS here in Perth. She helped to develop the new base salary structure. Her work is directly contributing to lifting salaries for around 8,000 APS colleagues as part of new enterprise agreements that have been voted up and approved by the Fair Work Commission. Thank you, Kimberly. And then I get to what we want to do as we position the APS for the future. We've been really open about the reforms we are making for the service. Reforms that have been very much needed and are delivering results. We have a new Anti-Corruption Commission, which commenced operations on 1 July 2023, fulfilling an election commitment and meeting the expectations of the Australian people. We have improved protection for public sector whistleblowers. And we have agreed in principle to all 56 recommendations of the Roadshow Commission, and we are investing in implementing those recommendations. And I'm really pleased that even in the face of challenges, level of employee engagement in the APS is high. The 2023 employee census showed us around 3 in 4 APS employees expressed job satisfaction and that their work gave them a sense of accomplishment. And we know that there are things that agencies can and are doing to build on this. They can actively promote an inclusive workplace culture and show that they care about employee health and wellbeing. They can improve their communication internally and encourage support staff to come up with better ways of doing things. When we came to office, we commissioned an APS audit of employment. This estimated the use of external labour across the Australian public service. That audit found in 21-22 there was an external labour force of 53,911 employees at a cost of $20.8 billion. In other words, the total Australian government workforce was around 37% larger than the workforce measured by public servant numbers alone. Our government is committed to rebalancing the APS to ensure it has the people and skills it needs to do its job. By the end of last financial year, ongoing APS employees were up 7.3% from the year before, with a priority of boosting the workforce in large service delivery agencies. Further, the new strategic commissioning framework is giving agencies guidance on how to work towards reducing inappropriate outsourcing. There's always a speech longer than you want to get through, and I'm going to jump over a few things because I think the next section we'll get to in the questions that I know are coming. So I'll conclude with this. For many of you, the way that you serve the public today is completely unrecognisable to the Postmaster General's telegraph messengers from 1904. Very few of you ride bikes along the bumpy, dusty dirt lanes of North Perth and beyond. But just like those telegraph messengers, you are part of your community and you serve your community. I always like to say that the public service isn't something that is distant to all of us. The public service is our family, it's our friends, it's our neighbours. And for me, that is true. My great-grandmother was a public servant working in the Australian Tax Office for many years. She herself was a war widow, and one of her jobs was to help war widows like her get access to the support they need. My wife started her career working at Services Australia. My parents were both primary school teachers, and my grandmother worked in the health department. And one of my very best friends, Ali Vaughan, works in the Department for Health here in WA. The public service isn't separate to the community, it's a core part of the community. And I recognise that, and one of my jobs and one of the things I want to get out of all of these roadshows and everything I do as the Assistant Minister for the Public Service is not just to thank you for the work that you do, but to make sure that the entire Australian community recognises that Australia is stronger with a strong public service. Australia has a fantastic public service, and we all get the results that we collectively want when we all back our public service. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Assistant Minister Gorman, for those comments, and in particular, thank you for your acknowledgement of public servants. Here in Western Australia, I know you have many heroes battling day in and day out, doing a great job, as we do in the state public sector, and often not recognised. So thank you so much for those comments. So the State of the Service Roadshow is an annual occasion where you get to come together and talk through ideas for the public service. It showcases the key themes from your State of the Service report and the APS employee census. Most importantly, it allows us to engage directly with APS staff about key topics that are impacting you and your work. It's a time also to celebrate the work we do for Australians and discuss the critical issues that we need to consider in order to help us implement positive change. And we're now going to show a bit of a highlight of what some of our colleagues most value about working in the Australian public service. So we're going to play that for you now.
Service is something that's near and dear to my heart, whether you're serving the country or serving your community.
I like knowing that I'm a part of something bigger than myself.
It's been a fantastic opportunity to see projects from start to finish.
I'm supported to have a working arrangement that is flexible as a working mother.
I get to work really closely with state and territory governments.
It grants me the opportunity to listen to our communities and get their feedback.
And when you hear a community group say thank you for the work that you're doing, nothing compares to that.
It's a really rewarding environment. You get to work with some inspiring people.
It has given me a lot of opportunity which I never imagined possible.
Okay, so much good stuff happening in the APS. But now it's time to move into our panel discussion, and a reminder, if you have a question for the panel, which I'm sure many of you will, please send it through Slido. And the QR code should be on the screen again now for those who might have missed it the first time around. So there it is for you. If you see a question and you want to hear the answer, you need to get behind it and you have to like it up. I guess you know what that means, right? You've got to get behind it and like it, and that will vote it up. And the more votes, the more likely that question will be asked and answered. And so now it's my great privilege to introduce to you our panellists, and they're going to come and join me on stage. We already have the Assistant Minister for the Public Service, Patrick Gorman, who we've already heard from just a moment ago. Also joining us on the stage will be Dr. Gordon de Brouwer, who was introduced a little earlier. Welcome to you, Gordon. And Denise Craig, the National Manager at Services Australia for Health Zone West. Please join me in welcoming them as your panellists today. Okay, I'm going to move across here. Okay, can people hear me well enough? Terrific. Okay, a few questions. So we're going to have questions coming in, and you've got the QR code there. And to kick off, I have a question that I would just like to start with the panel, and then we'll deal with the questions as they come through. I might start, Gordon, with you. Right from the top. What do you see as the challenges for APS's leadership being more diverse, and how do we overcome that?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Now, this is my first opportunity to speak, so I'd like to also acknowledge it's great to be in Perth, and I really love coming to WA and being on Wajak Noongar country, and pay my respect to traditional custodians, and to the Minister and Denise, and Sharon, very much so nice from Commonwealth working with the WA Public Service. But I really wanted to thank you, our public servants in WA, for what you do, and to acknowledge that and just how great it is. Okay, the challenges on on diversity. I think for leaders that there are two. I mean, one is that the leadership itself is really representative of our nation, as the Minister outlined, and how do we get there? And that's really important because we need to understand and reflect our nation to do our job. But actually that whole breadth of diversity means that we're just so much better at our job if we are. We do it generally, I think, for the Commonwealth on gender. Actually, we've got that across all the levels, especially through the SES and the executive level. We've got good 50-50 balance. We've got that there well. But where we don't do well on diversity is both through disability, through cultural and linguistic diversity, and First Nations. Minister mentioned what we're doing on the SES 100 for First Nations, taking from 54 SES to 100 SES, and that's progressing. I mean, that really is progressing. On called, we, as a public service, we do represent our nation, but as a senior levels of the public service, we don't. So we fall actually half short of what we should be. And that's really going to be one of the things that's addressed in the called strategy. On disability, again, we fall short. Population-wise, about 15% of people would say would recognise a disability. Of our service, 5% would say that also in their employee data in the census, which is anonymous, maybe sort of 10% or 11%. But we've got more work to do on that. And it is really important, because if the leadership doesn't have it, then it can't actually lead and do. When it comes down to the day-to-day, that really is, I think, the core of it is listening to people. So starting off that conversation of what's your experience, what matters to you, not presuming that. The call was pretty exceptional in what it revealed, because people spoke about their lived experience, and it wasn't what some people thought was the lived experience. So really listening and being attentive to that, and looking for solutions with people is the core to that.
Yeah, and Gordon, just while I'm waiting for questions to come up, so people are sending them through, but we're waiting for them to come up for me here. Gordon, just on that point, with the census, were people comfortable? Did you get an idea that people were comfortable to report, for example, disability status in the census? Because in Western Australia here, we've got more work to do about people feeling comfortable actually saying that they're a person with a disability.
More and more. So I think we're changing, and I'd say, frankly, changing in a significant way. So the census numbers are much higher, so more than double what you get in the employment statistics or how you formally record it. I think one of the big things in this census was around neurodiversity. Yeah. This is the first time we asked people to talk about in the census neurodiversity, and 10% would say they would identify as neurodiverse, and another 10% would be unsure. Now we're getting closer. That 10 to 20% is actually quite similar to the population, but for the first time we're able to talk about neurodiversity, and we use it as a way also of people being who they are in the workplace. But actually, it's one of our recruitment strategies and one of our retention strategies. Is that there's a lot of skills and capability that come with being neurodiverse, and how do we use that in the service? Yeah, well, that's something that perhaps we can learn from you. I don't think we asked that question. We did our first ever census just last year, so perhaps we can learn a bit from you in asking that question. I'm going to change the theme and take you right to the hardcore of some of the discussions that are going on at the moment, and some questions around whether you would ever consider a 4-day working week. Well, do you want to start, Denise? do you want me to answer this one, Sharon?
Are you asking me, do I want one? I'm happy to hear from anyone on this topic. Perhaps let's start with you, Gordon.
We're just concluding an enterprise agreement, and that's actually pretty momentous in terms of the pay and the terms and conditions, especially the standardisation of conditions across the whole service. That's a big step. So I want to thank you actually for voting it up. So a 4-day week, that's not on the table now, okay. But that's something that's part of a conversation.
Yeah. And Denise, how do you feel? How would that work for you? You know, this question of 4-day week, you're managing a pretty large outfit.
Thanks, Sharon. And before I start, can I just say I'm proud to live and work in Western Australia and a badge-carrying public servant. So 4-day week, people ask me that all the time. Service delivery, very difficult for us to, people think it's very difficult for us to consider flexible work, but I think Services Australia is doing a really good job of stepping into the idea of flexible work. So who knows if it is a consideration in the future. I think our agency will get behind it.
Assistant Minister, would you like to work a 4-day? Instead of a 7-day?
I think it's really important that we're having this discussion about what is going to give us the best services to the Australian people. Like, that's my job, is when I come to this discussion, is not to go, well, how do I feel about a 4-day week, or how do I feel about working from home? My job when I come to these discussions is to go, well, how do I get the best outcomes for the people that we all seek to serve? And that also involves making sure that we've got the best people in the public service, all of you. It's something that obviously we've seen at the state level. It's on some people's desk at the moment. It wasn't a priority in the last round, as the Commissioner just said. But I also acknowledge that one of the things is that if I look at the data, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've got about 80% of positions in the Australian Public Service are currently full-time. Some people choose to work a 0.8 or a 0.6. Some of those flexibilities are also really important to make sure that people, where they do have other responsibilities or other things they want to do or study or creative outlets, all of those things, there's other ways of getting that flexibility, and obviously we've tried to get that right in a broad discussion. And I just think on this, ultimately, how I always come to it, and anyone who wants to have this discussion, think about, well, how do we make sure we've got the working arrangements that give us the best results for the Australian people? And that means it's a pretty broad conversation about what sort of things we can do for the future.
Yeah, hot topic, and all these things seem to be a matter of balance, as we're finding here in Western Australia. We didn't have working from home to the extent that the East Coast did, or a lot of people didn't here. Our situation was a little different, but yeah, something certainly people are talking about and everyone will give consideration to, as you say, as a matter of balance. Okay, let's keep going down this track, or a slightly connected track. Why are jobs that are able to be performed remotely not open to staff located in WA? Often jobs are advertised that don't include WA as a suitable location.
Can I just say, as a Western Australian, I also would like to know, Commissioner.
Yes, I'm waiting to hear the answer too.
Okay, to be honest, I was surprised when I saw that, because I don't think that's where we're up to now, and I think that's changing. And we talk about this, but I think in the past year or so, the number of jobs that are saying flexible work or different arrangements gone from around 5% to about a third of those jobs are in that domain. And I think we're in a process of a change where it's actually more natural to have not remote working, but distributed working. So we're changing our models from being central with lots of remote, and if you're remote, well, you're not really one of us, it's the central, to calling our workplaces distributed workplaces. And technology and different work practices and the pandemic really profound in that. So I think there's a change, a big change underway. If that's enough of
Okay, you heard it here. So remember, keep the questions flowing through those people online as well as in the room. So Assistant Minister, this one's for you. When will the high standards of conduct and behaviour applied and expected of public servants apply to politicians?
That is actually a really good question. It is. But what I'd say is there will always be, I don't ever want people to think, while we both have public service and those values of doing something as a servant to others, as a steward for the next generation, we all share those values. I think it's important that we recognise that the role of a public servant, apolitical, serving the government of the day, versus a politician who has very strong, very publicly stated views about things. We shouldn't think that they are exactly the same, nor should they have the same rules. What we do need, though, is to lift the standard. If I look at the work that we've done in the Parliament, coming out of the Kate Jenkins review, the Set the Standard report, we now have an independent parliamentary workplace support service. We are working towards implementing some additional standards pieces that will happen over the next year to make sure that we do have that standard setting in the Parliament. And we recognise that my workplace, the Parliament, is both Canberra as much as it is Hyde Park, where I'll be for the Hyde Park Festival on the weekend, as much as it is my electorate office, as much as it is here. So it's a very different workplace. The other thing I'd say is that there are some very tough standards that do apply to us. All of you can get out your phone, you can look at my financial interests, you can see that online. I have to declare all of that. I stand at an election once every 3 years. People get to choose who goes into the Parliament, and that is a pretty accountable process. I fronted up this morning to Nadia Mitsopoulos to answer her questions for 20 minutes. I'm here answering your questions. And of course, we also have the Ministerial Code of Conduct, which we really strengthened when the government came in to make sure that there was a really clear expectation of the sorts of conduct and behaviour of ministers, recognising the power that ministers have in a Westminster system. And finally, I mentioned in my speech, when I got elected, there was no anti-corruption commission that oversaw me. Nothing at all. You had them in every state and territory, but we just walked around with none of that oversight. As of the middle of last year, that changed. And that powerful anti-corruption commission has oversight of members of parliament, has oversight of ministers, as it should, and it's operating right now. So we've gone a long way.
And I guess underlying that for politicians and for public servants alike is the matter of trust. The trust of the community, which we're all working so hard to make sure we maintain to a high level. Okay, let's go to, will the right to disconnect apply to public servants? How will politicians change their behaviour to respect this? We might have to start with you, Assistant Minister, on this one. The right to disconnect after hours.
So in terms of the right to disconnect measures that were in the Fair Work legislation, obviously that still is underpinned by enterprise agreements. You're all covered by enterprise agreements. Some of you very recently voted on them and supported those changes. But ultimately, it comes down to what is the needs of the workplace. Parliament doesn't sit between 9 and 5. Not all of these sorts of events happen between the hours of 9 and 5. There are times that we expect public servants, if they're working on a particular project, to put in those additional hours. And I thank people for that, and I recognise that it can come with a burden. But it's also important that in a great democracy like Australia, where you've got parliamentary accountability, we couldn't run the Senate. At 5 o'clock, you couldn't contact a public servant. That wouldn't work. We couldn't do events where only public servants engage between 9 and 5. But we also recognise that when we do have 170,332 public servants, not every single one of them needs to be online and contactable at every moment of every day. And I think, obviously, there's work that our managers can do at all levels of the public service to make sure that people do get those opportunities that come with doing things that don't always fall within core work hours, but also that you are there for your kids, you're there for your family, if you've got caring responsibilities for an elderly relative, or you actually just know that you're better on a Monday if you've switched off on the weekend, that's completely fine.
Thank you. And Denise, let's hear from you on the right to disconnect and how that might impact or work. Have you thought about how that works for you in your workplace?
So working in service delivery and an agency like Services Australia, we do try hard to make sure that people can maintain a good work-life balance, but obviously, as Minister Gorman said, being in service delivery, we respond to the community's needs, and emergencies and things like that don't happen between 9 and 5, so there are many times when we do have to ask people to work additional hours, or I have to jump on the phone and sort through an issue that's happening. But I think the good thing about working in public service is it can be a good give and take. And someone told me many years ago, we cast long shadows. So the way that we support, the way that we manage our work-life balance and the way we support our staff, I think gives us a good foundation for being able to do that.
Thanks, Denise. And Gordon, I'm going to go to you on this next question. It's about home-based work. So there's a bit of a theme with some of these questions. How is the APS going to address the conflicting decisions agencies are making on home-based work requests now that limits have been removed in new agreements?
Yeah, very good question. So the enterprise agreement says that flexible work has to be negotiated in that workplace, rather than there's a blanket propositional rule, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or whatever that may be. So no arbitrary pronouncements, but actually it's got to be negotiated.
The agreement's now removed the stating whether you can have 3 days or 2 days.
It has to be negotiated in the workplace. But and there are three elements to flexibility that have to be part of that negotiation. It's what are the needs of the institution, what it's producing, what it's doing to serve the public. It has to be the needs of the team, that actually operational team that a member's or person's part of. And actually, the third is what are the person's own needs or aspirations, and how do those three things fit together? That will be very different in different kinds of institutions. Very different if you're a policy analyst in the tax office compared to a service delivery person at Services Australia face to face with a member of the public. And that's got to be then negotiated there. And that's the starting point. Now, I think that puts quite a big onus then on different institutions to do that well. And I expect there's going to be a learning through that. But it's not a matter of there's a simple rule. It's actually what works in each context. That's very important, because actually the effectiveness of an institution, indeed its own productivity, is local. It depends on actually what the needs are of that and what it's providing. So I think those negotiations that's where it starts. Government had a very clear overall policy imperative on this, is that workplaces are places of negotiation. It's not places of being told what to do in some of those elements. Lawful direction's right, but actually it has to be a negotiated outcome. Now, I think what we'll do is we'll be going through learnings on that. We will share those learnings across the service. I think we are mindful of, are there consistencies in Services Australia Perth, Services Australia Broome, Services Australia in Hobart, and how do we monitor and look at that? Consistency between Services Australia Perth and the ATO in Townsville. We'll be looking at that. So that'll be all part of the feedback, but that'll be informing actually how systems work and what's effective for people, rather than prescriptive and just saying it from the start.
There is learning needed around this. I know in this state there's been quite a bit of angst about the inconsistent application. I think people understand that each workplace is a bit different, the needs of teams can be a little different, but it has caused quite a bit of upset for some people, feeling that somehow they've been the decision about their working from home arrangement is not fair when they look at someone else. So I guess there's some work for managers in that too, to think about that moderation across the total. Thanks for that, Gordon. Okay, how do we attract and retain talent in the APS when salaries are not keeping up with the cost of living? There are hardly any APS 4 and 5 left, and APS 6 is endangered. Goodness. Sounds worrisome. Who would like to start on this one? This is sort of salaries based. We're all looking at you, Gordon.
Okay. Look, I think we acknowledge. I think it's right to acknowledge that we've gone through a really big inflationary burst, and that's been across the nation. And actually, most people have had real wage cuts from that inflationary burst. It's actually really hard when you're for a lot of people. That actually is really hard as well, and we acknowledge that. And I think the government went through this negotiation of the pay terms. It was a negotiated arrangement, and I don't think people receiving salaries at APS level got what they wanted, but actually that was where the negotiation landed. And I think that's a feature that's across the country, actually. All of that said, we're very intent on giving people being properly paid for the work that they do and respecting that. Flexible work arrangements also help with that, so there are other things that are going on, and enabling sort of people to have a great career and contribute as part of it. But I think the Minister also...
I was just going to tie a few of those threads together too. One of the things when Minister Gallagher put out the public service reform agenda, one of the core components of that was this idea that we wanted to ensure that the Australian public service was a model employer. We heard from people where that wasn't their experience at that point in time. We'd heard from people where they said, well, how come my friend who does a very similar job in either in some cases contracted out or in similar agencies or in state public service, how come their world looks like this and mine looks like that? So we've put that as a core part of that public service reform agenda. to be a model employer. That's the aspiration we've set for ourselves. Now, some of that is salaries, some of it is training and those opportunities that come. Some of it is making sure, as we do in the survey through the State of the Service report, that there's really good job satisfaction. If you think about what we want to make sure is that when you're giving years, decades of your life to something, serving the Australian Public Service and the Australian public at large, we want to make sure that that's not just for a paycheck, but it is also something that you're really proud of. So we want to be that model employer where you are the advocate that will go and say to your family and friends, I love my APS career, you should come and do this too.
I think we're still learning. We're still learning in Services Australia how home-based work can work for different roles, and Gordon actually mentioned that we've got so many different roles. How does someone who works in a face-to-face site in Services Australia work from home? We had a discussion about that the other day. So we're learning. We are very supportive of it, but I think the other thing that we do recognise in Services Australia is that we are a team-based environment. And if I think about the recruitment we've just done, brought on 3,000 people or more than 3,000 people in a couple of months, and if I think about in WA, if you're not a new person, you're someone supporting a new person. We need people in the office at the moment to be able to support those sorts of recruitment drives. But we are stepping into it, and we're stepping into it strongly. Before COVID, in Services Australia, you wouldn't have even thought about working from home. But now we have offices where we've wanted to do recruitment, but we don't have enough desks. So we've introduced hybrid arrangements where people share a desk. Someone works from home while someone has a desk in the office. So I personally love it. I personally will get involved in every conversation in our agency about how we can support it. But the important thing to remember is this is a change, and our team leaders need to be supported in a change as well. So yeah, as I said, we're all learning together.
Thank you. See which one's working. Is anything working? Are we working here?
Let's all do a mic check. No.
No. Oh,
yeah,
yes, I'm fine.
Right. Well,
hey.
You can
thank
just
you.
have my mic.
If you were signalling to us, we couldn't see you, so thank you. Yeah, Gordon, just to finish out this question around working from home, managers and training or further development, I mean, this whole hybrid situation, some people at work, some people not, some people in remote locations. What are you going to do? I mean, we've been thinking about this for ourselves. How do we help managers learn a new way of managing, if you like?
Yeah, so we can do some elements through training for managers and that conversation. But the key thing is those workplace conversations around, when we say what a team needs, of really being clear that if you've got new recruits, and I'm thinking of grads, but new recruits, someone new in the workplace, how do they really understand the nature of that work? And there's so much that you see by being there and doing that really helps people grow. And it's also, it's that professional development. It's just the craft, understanding how to go about these things, and you can't intuit that unless you've experienced it. It also goes, frankly, to issues around corruption and maybe also an extent of work health and safety, of how do we know that actually you've got a safe workplace and we're responsible for you having a safe workplace? How do we know that? We can't. I'm not going into your home. We're not doing that. I mean, that's a privacy thing. But how do we over time deal with that? Now, the pandemic was something we did this really quick in a pandemic, and we had shortcuts and we had ways of dealing with it that were really fitted to the exigencies and the urgency of the time. But as you think through the consequences for professional development, safety, of do we have implicit biases in who we give work to? Are they accentuated by remote or distributed working, or are they? How do we engage with that? How do we understand them? They're all things that in a workplace we want to talk about, and then talk about that with managers, but managers also with their teams, and what works. Because it's not really just a matter of, it's not an exercise of control, frankly. It's really how do you make this workplace most effective and productive and good for the people who are working there.
And how you bring the best out
Yep.
in people too. Okay, let's move to opportunities for advancement. The question that's been put, and this one for you, Minister, opportunities for advancement are still really limited in Western Australia, I guess unless you go off to the resources sector. With remote working and virtual teams, why is everything still so centralised in Canberra?
I started my speech talking about the history of the Commonwealth Public Service. For a number of years it was based in Melbourne. 1927 it moved to Canberra. That has been our history, is that has been for more than a century where we have done our work of the public service. We're going on a journey of seeing different ways of doing work and different models of leadership, and I think that's really exciting, but as the Commissioner just outlined, it comes with a range of complexities too. We are seeing more and more public servants here. I think we now at just over 8,000 public service roles for the Commonwealth here in WA. More openness about how different roles are done here or elsewhere. But I'd also say one of the things I find, I'm a West Australian, born in Freo. One of the things I find is that when I go to Canberra, there are so few Western Australians. So I would also encourage, for those where it is an option for you, if you want to further your career in Canberra or elsewhere, that's a fantastic thing to do as well. And it goes both ways. Equally, it's really great to have senior leaders of the public service choose to do some of their career here in WA, where again, you can learn from those people who've got an experience from another agency. And we're also seeing agencies here in the West grow, which obviously comes with it more progression opportunities. But it is complex, and it's also really useful. I mean, one of the things I think about all of the questions we're getting is that it's not just us answering a question based on the answer that exists today. The reason we do this, and the reason we'll all have a cup of tea with you afterwards, is because we actually want to hear your thoughts on where the service needs to go. That's the whole point of the State of the Service report. It's the whole point of us being here, is not just to answer the question as of the 1st of March 2024, but also to shape our thinking as we go, well, what do we need to 2030? What do we need as the nature of the service changes, the work of the service changes, and we keep stepping into that aspiration to be that model employer.
Thank you. And one of the interesting questions that's coming up now is around recruitment practices. And I might just make some comments about this before throwing over to other people on the panel. The question's around, will there be a consistent approach to recruitment practices given most of the processes are outsourced? And there might be something else to that question that is particular to the APS, but certainly here in the West, there has been a tendency for a lot of the administration, at least, of recruitment practices to be given to consultants. And that's something as a Commissioner I've been looking at, trying to actually streamline what's required. My experience actually as a Commissioner is that we, and Gordon, you might be the same, I have Commissioner's instructions setting the rules of recruitment, if you like, but what I find is agencies often add their own layers on top of that. And so when people confront me and talk to me about the burdensome nature of recruitment, actually it's very often not the original rules, but what gets added. And most of the things that get added, the layers get added, is in an attempt to avoid breaches and getting the process wrong. And in fact, there's so few of those here. So we're just looking right now at our recruitment processes and how we can streamline, get quicker to market. It's a hot market, hard to get people in. So we're trying to do some things around streamlining. And recently last year I put out a directive where in Western Australia, public service, you could go direct to recruitment for diversity groups. So without a full process, an individual assessment of merit, you can go direct to those people, and you can do that in regional areas. So we're just trying to mix up and do some different things to see how we can streamline recruitment. But there might be something else at the bottom of this question, Gordon, that I'm less familiar with because it might be about the APS. But so perhaps you might want to jump in here. But about a consistent approach, given that a lot of the processes are outsourced. That also tells me something about the state of HR in some of our places here. I think we need to be doing more to uplift and better recognise our HR practitioners. I'm talking about here in the state, but perhaps, Gordon, you might want to say something about this one.
Yeah, and Denise. So just on the HR, one thing that has been going for a few years is an HR profession in the APS. And that was a recognition, actually, that HR had been caricatured as just being some technical element.
Transactional work.
Transactional work, rather than really, you're at the strategic heart of an organisation, and our organisations are all about people. So that actually is the insight into the heart and operation of an organisation. So the HR profession, and we're going from 3 to about 5 or 6 professions now, and they're really where the areas where we think there's frankly a real skills or behavioural shortfall, or really big challenges like in data and digital, evaluation, procurement and project management. But HR, so we're putting there's a lot of emphasis going into that. It's also used as a way of lifting and upgrading these skills to actually really do that recruitment properly, but also to attract and keep people. So it's
are you concerned that there's, or are you aware, it seems to suggest that there's a lot of outsourcing of recruitment?
Yeah, so I think that's a conversation. So some of these things are that the policy is determined, but actually some of the operation is handy to have agents out there doing it for you. But actually, do you have the right oversight? And how does that work in practice? And I think there are really operational ones.
And retaining the decision, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. And also when you've got very large, like in Services Australia, but you've got very large recruitment programs, and how do you do that? And you have to stick by the merit principle. So we can't give up the merit principle. But I think we're introducing more flexibility in how we go about that for organisations like Services Australia that can enable that. So that's really on the table.
So the consistency has to stay around probity, equity, and merit.
And I'd also say one thing I'm aware of is that you don't want sort of unconscious biases going in pre-screening processes. I mean, that sounds that's a bit too obtuse, but in your early pre-screening, are we ruling out people actually of cultural linguistic diversity or other elements of diversity, and they just don't even they're not getting into the panel because there is something in the pre-screening process that washes them out.
What about you, Denise, in terms of recruitment and consistency in your organisation, if there's a lot of outsourcing where it might be done slightly differently through different processes? Do you have a view about that?
So ours is all managed nationally, and right now most of the processes are outsourced, but we're doing regular reviews of the processes, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and we're introducing new processes. So we're almost in a constant cycle of recruitment. So we now have a new process for our entry level positions where it's apply at any time, so every month. We actually go through an application process. We're creating merit pools, so when we can bring people on quickly to fill vacancies, we can. And we're currently looking at a process to fill out hard-to-fill locations like remote to how we can do that better, because we haven't been as successful.
And
as
with
we'd
any
like
consultants outsourcing, the key is strong oversight. So that would be maintained. We're going to flip from recruitment into robo-debt. Staff raised there was no legal basis for the robo-debt program from the start. In 2023, execs stated that the agency only found out in 2021.
So you haven't read the last word that says discuss.
Please discuss. I'm leaving it to you to discuss.
Yeah, so I'll do this, and Denise does. So the thing around, I don't know when. I don't know about what was said within Services Australia around when it found out, and so I really can't comment on that element of it. But I do want to be very clear around what we're learning and we're going through a process of learning at the moment around this. What we're learning around how do we deal with a number of problems that were evident from the Royal Commission, as well as a range of other reviews and reports. And the use of legal advice and how do you listen to your staff, especially operational staff at the front line. How do we engage in departments? What's the nature of hierarchy? Is it just a command and control from the top to the down? And then how do you have an open and genuine debate inside organisations, which is often comes from what people have to be a safe environment in order to raise that. People use the term psychosocial safety. It's a bit jargon, but you have to have a safe internal operating environment for people to say what really is going on. I think that is front and centre in all our minds, and we've got a number of things I think that are flowing through there. We really do take that one seriously.
The issue about legal advice.
On legal advice,
that was of interest to us too. It's called legal advice. Is it legal advice?
Well, this is very interesting. So there are different bits to that. One is that draft legal advice is legal advice. So you can't skirt around the idea. You've possibly got something here, but I'll call it draft. So we can avoid it being looked at. That doesn't cut it. So zero. There's no path on that one. And so draft legal advice is legal advice. Legal advice can have different things. It's not. Sometimes it can be the element of it that there are risks there, and how do you understand and engage the risks? Often they can tell you of the form in which you're doing it isn't going to work, isn't proper, and it's not just a matter of can you do it, it's whether you should do it. And be very clear, the public service guidance on this is that you have to consider whether you should do it, not just can you do it. Is it proper and ethical and a good thing to do? That actually is what we're required by law to do. So those conversations in organisations and teams really matters. The legal advice, it can often tell you as well that is it ruled out completely, there's no way in this, or are there ways to do it properly and ethically and legally? And that can be part of that consultation and that part of engagement. We have to have overt and honest conversations on that, and we have to have overt and honest conversations with ministers.
And I'm conscious you've probably got some reviews going on still around all of this.
Well, so when it comes to the individuals, so there are many different features of this. There are things that you learn around institutional behaviour and what's the way to run to do things. And then there are the individuals in those institutions. Okay. And I'm not talking at all about individuals because that's what we do. I mean, sure. But there's processes underway for that. And they are by law private and confidential processes because they're within the context of the employment relationship. Yeah. But the other ones around behaviour, we should talk about every day.
Thanks, Gordon. We might just ask you, Denise, also. Did you want to make any comment about this one?
Look, just following on from what Gordon has said, I think what we're learning or what we've learnt from the RoboDebt experience is that staff, when they see something that doesn't feel right or doesn't look right, that they speak up, and that it's a safe place for them to speak up. And I think as leaders, we're learning that we need to listen better. And my advice to my team is if you raise something and no one's listening, then find someone who will.
And one of those is us. Yeah. We have an ethics advisory hotline.
Okay. Call it. Yeah, if there's a problem. Minister, do you want to add anything to this one?
Look, the piece I'll add is simply we are acting on those 56 recommendations, which we've either accepted or accepted in principle. I think that's important for people to know that it's not just a Royal Commission report that's going to sit on the shelf. We've already acted upon the recommendations. Second piece is it is actually worth, maybe not the entire thing, it is a heavy report, but it is worth engaging with that report, the executive summary. It actually teaches us a lot about what is also good in the public service. One of the things I really like about, and I was really heartened to read in reading the RoboDebt Royal Commission report, is that it's also full of stories of public servants who did the right thing. Like, it's actually, that's in there too. And I know that in the commentary around the Robonet story, it is a story of failure where people were let down by a system and a policy setting that was unlawful. But you read that report, and I'll tell you, it won't take you long through that report to see public servants doing their job, abiding by their values, and delivering on what the public would expect from public servants in that situation. So if you read it through that lens, you'll actually be pretty proud of the work that you as public servants do and how your colleagues conducted themselves during that, what was a shameful episode of public administration. I think the other thing I'd say is that it strengthens government's resolve to expect the very best when it comes to advice for the policy decisions that we make. We deserve, and the public deserves, that when Cabinet or a government minister makes a decision changing policy settings that affect people's lives, you should expect the absolute best of advice from those public servants who advise you. And I know that meant that we have, in some areas, expected more, been working to lift that capability when it comes to advice, but that's a really important outcome as well.
Thank you. Thanks for those comments as well, Minister. And it's important for all of us just to keep that as a case study front and centre in our mind. If we don't learn from it, then I think that's kind of on us. So thank you. We asked for the hard questions, so thanks for people contributing these questions. What strategies will be considered to address toxic management practice and to produce healthy work environments, and how do you address consistently problematic ones? We're going to shoot this to you, Denise.
Good question again. I think as public servants and leaders in the public service, it's our job to create healthy work environments and an environment where people, are respected and are considerate of others. In Services Australia, we've got a pretty tough job. We've got high workloads, and the work that we do impacts on individuals in the community. So sometimes there is a tension between having to deliver the work and deliver customer outcome, and also being able to provide the environment that people would think is a supportive and healthy environment. But that's not an excuse. I think we all absolutely have to work hard to make sure that if the workload's high or the tensions are high, that we discuss it, we talk about it, we raise issues, we provide context to people. I think people will do just about anything for you if you provide them the context. And why you're asking them to do that. I personally think that I would like to know, I'd like to have an open door policy and like to know that if somebody is feeling like that in my teams or in my branch, that they have that they feel that it's a safe environment to raise the issue with me.
And this question really is focused on not just the workplace, but toxic management practices, which I think is really, an interesting sort of take on that question. And I recently went, I was overseas, and I went to the OECD and meeting with the researchers there, and they talked about how there's been an enormous input to leadership and probably less of a focus over recent years on management skills. And so that's something that I'm really thinking about here, that people often through their expertise and expert areas kind of rise up into management with not always a lot of really good input on management skills. And so, I was just interested in this part of the question, Denise, around toxic management and, what you guys might be thinking about doing in terms of further management training.
So maybe just if I'll talk about the system, you've got 170,000 people, and sometimes the management will come down to the senior executive level. So it's about, secretaries and the senior executive, it's about 3,250. So a couple of things, and then the ELs, and we've got very specific training around executive levels as well. That's about 25,000 people. But for that senior executive service and also secretaries and agency heads, We've now standardised the performance management system for them. It's across the service. That's to say that how you deliver your job, and you get a rating. That's your outcome and delivery. And then how you behave, how you do your job, that actually is a separate thing you get a rating for. And what's your aggregate rating? Well, in this basic model, it's actually the lowest. So if you delivery and behaviour really matter, and they're separately identified and they're separately assessed, and that will become more and more important over time in how you are promoted or do you get into the service. We do it increasingly through, especially for senior officers, of screening around those things, and talking about it's actually you're delivering, but how you deliver matters as well. And you can't sustain delivery if actually your behaviours are appalling. So those sorts of things, they're unacceptable. They're unacceptable in the public service, and the systems are designed to get it. Now that sounds a bit punitive, but actually there's also a lot of support and professional development that goes with that. Yeah. Be very clear about the expectations and also the support that's there to help people do that.
It sounds really interesting that you're kind of going down a delivery and how people do their work. We've had a bit of a focus here on leadership behaviour, the how people do their work, which so often sets the tone, doesn't it, in a workplace. We might go back to the topic of public trust. With public trust in government and politicians eroding, this person's asking, how can we ensure that erosion of trust does not permeate into the delivery of services? I'm going to start with you, Minister, and then perhaps Gordon after that.
Well, if we look at the challenge that this question goes to, which is about this eroding trust in decision makers, being parliamentarians and ministers, and eroding trust in services run by the public service. I think if you go one step above all of that, there's actually this big risk in Australia, which we have to be very conscious of, and we all have a responsibility for, which is the erosion of the idea that democracy is the best form of government. If you look at what's happening around the world, you'd recognise that democracy is under a lot of pressure. And ultimately, the best way, in my view, that you push against that erosion of democracy and democratic values is to constantly show people that democracy does deliver outcomes. When I think about my role as a Member of Parliament, it's about saying, well, yes, I need to show that democracy, because I was voted to deliver a National Anti-Corruption Commission, we have done that. And I can go back to the people who voted for me and say that that's the case. But also to show that democratic oversight of public services, government agencies, is how you ensure that when things do go wrong, and we just talked about the robo-debt example before, there's also a democratic story there as well, which is that when things go wrong, there are those checks and balances in place. Because if you imagine a world where those checks and balances aren't there, then that's a world where you have a real erosion of trust, but people just give up. They just go, well, no one's going to do anything about it, why would I bother? And then you start to erode the quality of services, and you have that big erosion of democratic values, and you find yourself in a very unfortunate form or system of government. So that's my big thesis on the project we all have, which is to show that democracy, for all of its ugliness at times, that democracy actually delivers for people. And that's the thing that I think, however you engage in a democratic society, we all have a responsibility there.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. So important. Gordon, did you want to say?
Yeah. So maybe I'll say to the people, the public servants here, that there are two things that really drive public trust in government or in what you do. One is that you do your job well. People can see that you do your job well, which is why we talk a lot about capability. We have a lot of things going on around improving capability. The other side of trust, though, is that people think that you're fair and honest in the way you go about your job. And that goes to integrity. And that's why we talk a lot about integrity. So that's in your hands. That's in your hands. It really matters. One of the most really interesting things around trust in government can be trust in government, can be trust in government services, or it can be trust in the services provided by Services Australia, the Tax Office or Home Affairs. And those things are really, the numbers land differently. If it's a general proposition, it's lower. But the more specific it becomes, actually the higher it becomes. And that goes back to the way you do your job. I mean, the capability, actually doing your job matters, and doing it with honesty and openness and fairness really matters.
Yep. And great respect, yeah. Thank you. So we're getting right to the end. So a really big question here that I want each of you to think about. And we won't have time to go into enormous detail about these. But what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the APS over the next 5 years? Denise, I'm going to pick you first. What do you see as the challenges, the biggest challenges? Perhaps name a couple, two perhaps, facing the APS in the next 5 years, or just something that comes to your mind.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is retaining technical expertise, and somebody talked earlier about leaders, of retaining our really good leaders. I would hope that we sit here in the next 2 or 3 years and that question about opportunities in WA doesn't exist anymore, and that we are starting to see it'll be a great opportunity, but how do we keep people?
Great, thanks, Denise. Gordon.
So I'll frame this in terms of what's our purpose really, and our purpose is to improve and protect the lives of the people of Australia and our natural world, and that's the challenge. Is actually how do we do that of improving the outcomes for people, and all the things that we do that we can see that materially improves people's lives. That's what we're here for.
How about you, Mr.?
I think the Commissioner in his previous answer actually got onto the core of it, which is capability and integrity. They're the two things. Capability for the public service to do its job well. And if I think about the thing that government has a responsibility to ensure, is it to ensure we've got the policy settings to deliver that capability through training, through the APS Academy, through training in Services Australia or other agencies that have good in-house training, through making sure that we have the people that are needed, we do that retention piece. It's kind of a bit like, I always talk about like productivity. They say, productivity is not everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. And I think when it comes to the public service, capability is not everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything.
And I think all of those things are totally on the money. Gordon, you and I yesterday met in a group with Sir Jeff Mulgan, and he talked about human government, which I thought was a really interesting concept, and I hadn't really had a chance to hear him before. The way in which we work with the community, provide to the community, all of our services to the community, of which people like yourself are elected government for that, and that's our role as public servants. And then I also talked about not just human government outwardly, but for public services and people like Gordon, you and I, and Denise, how we humanise, make sure we keep humanising our own workforces. Not that they're not human, but that all of the questions today, I mean, probably 70% of the questions today are around your work experience, how you are in the workplace, how it is in the workplace for you. So kind of keeping that front of mind. Gordon, I just wonder, with the questions, just to wrap up, there have been a lot of great questions digging into some really good issues. In your state of the sector, and so some of those are kind of critical because they're kind of getting to things that people want to talk about. What were the standout really positive things? This is not on my script, but I'm really interested. Because as you said, Minister, so many fantastic things come out of either difficult moments like robo-debt or other things. In the State of the Service report, what stood out as a really encouraging thing, Gordon?
So there are great stories in there. So this one got very great stories about what public servants do, and so everyone can see what the public service does, and frankly how great it is, how great and how important it is. I thought one of the standout to me is there's quite a high engagement of public service servants with their job, and it's not perfect, but there's also a high degree of satisfaction and a sense that people are making a difference to the world from what they're doing. Engagement really matters. So the more engaged a workforce is, and we know this, we've got lots of evidence, and it's in the corporate sector as well, of if you're engaged in your workplace, then actually you're more likely to do a much better job. And that is if you've got a sense of fulfilment and joy in your job, which is very important, but actually you're having an impact. And it's much better government. So that's good. That's actually pretty good for the service. Could be better, but it's actually pretty good.
So lots of great stories in there.
Yeah.
I'm just going to duck over and grab my piece of paper here because I was jumping up and down, and I just need to make sure I know how to finalise our discussion and bring it to a close. So many good things in State of the Sector, so many great questions today. You've obviously got terrific engagement in the APS, so that's an aspiration I have, obviously, for my sector as well. I want to thank all of the speakers today, Gordon, and of course you, Minister, for coming today, and Denise, thank you also for your time. And I want to thank everyone for watching and engaging in the authentic way you did, and for bringing the questions in the way that you did and not shying away from some of those tough issues that actually just have to be brought to the light. So thank you for that. For more insights on the key themes discussed today, I can encourage you to check out the State of the Service report, as you just mentioned, Gordon, and that's on your website, the Australian Public Service Commission's website. So recommend in your quiet moment you go and read how many pages? Many pages? Or just pick out some of those. There you go.
There's a good web digital version too. You don't have to go to the...
No, that's right.
Just dig into that and find out the good stories, but also, you know, some of those issues that we're confronting and wanting to talk about. Keep an eye out for a follow-up email that will come also from today's session, and it might answer some of those questions you asked that we just couldn't get to today. So the State of the Service Roadshow is going to continue with events in Canberra, Newcastle and Townsville. I won't be accompanying the team, but I wish you the best for those events. And thank you for those in the room today. Thank you for coming, for making the time come. Those people online, also thank you for being with us in that mode today. And again, to the panel. Everyone, please stay. There's some networking time and opportunity outside of this room, so please join with us. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this roadshow today.